United States, autumn 2019. It was late afternoon on a nearly empty interstate highway, one of those that seemed to lead nowhere. An ordinary bus, ordinary passengers, until something spiraled completely out of control. That day, an armed gang stopped the bus in the middle of the road. They thought they had chosen the right victims. They thought they were in control. They thought they knew exactly what they were doing. What they didn't know was that someone was inside that bus. Someone who didn't react with fear. Someone who didn't scream. Someone who changed everything without touching a weapon. Today, you will hear a story that many have tried to forget. A story that didn't make the newspapers. A true event that forever marked everyone who was there. But before we continue, hello, welcome to this channel where we share untold true stories about Jesus. Before we begin, I want to extend a special invitation to you. Leave a comment telling us where you're listening from right now and the exact time. Like this video because it helps this story reach more people who might need to hear it today. Now take a deep breath, because what happened on that road wasn't an ordinary robbery. And after this video, you'll never look at a bus or a stranger next to you the same way again. This happened on an ordinary Tuesday, one of those days that nobody remembers afterwards. It was October, late afternoon, low grey sky, crosswind hitting the side of the bus. The route connected two medium-sized cities in the interior of the United States, a long interstate highway surrounded by dry fields and gas stations too far apart to provide comfort. I was in seat 17 by the window. The bus wasn't full, maybe 25 people, workers going home, a mother with a sleeping girl in her lap, two students with headphones, a man in a rumpled suit who looked like he'd lost more than just a job, and there was him. At that moment, he was just another passenger. Simple, light brown clothes, worn sandals, short beard. He didn't attract attention. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't use a cell phone. He looked out the window a lot, as if he were observing something that no one else could see. He sat 2 rows ahead of me on the aisle side. Nothing, absolutely nothing, indicated what was about to happen. The driver, an experienced man, one of those who knows the road by the sound of the tires, slowed down even before we saw the problem. I noticed because the engine's roar changed. Then I saw 2 cars across the shoulder, one black and the other red, partially blocking the lane. "Damn it!" someone muttered behind me. The bus started to brake. There were no signs. There was no construction. There was no police presence. Men only. 4 of them got out of the cars, all young, all armed, loose jackets, hoods, weapons displayed without haste. That confidence of those who have done this before. The silence inside the bus grew heavy. It wasn't panic yet. It was denial. People tried to convince themselves that it's nothing, that it will pass. The bus came to a complete stop. One of the men banged hard on the door. The dry sound echoed inside the vehicle like a gunshot. "Open it, now!" The driver hesitated for a second that seemed an eternity, then pressed the button. The door opened with a hydraulic sigh, almost a lament. 2 of them went up. The smell of gasoline and dust wafted in. "Everyone quiet, nobody stand up, nobody make jokes," said the tallest one, pointing the gun without any tremor. The girl woke up crying. Her mother tried to cover her mouth, desperately apologizing to men who weren't there to hear apologies. My heart was beating so fast, I was sure they could hear it. One of the men walked slowly down the aisle, observing each face, not angrily, calculatingly, like someone choosing products off a shelf, wallets and cell phones. Now, people began to obey, trembling hands, downcast eyes. No one is a hero when the gun is 2 meters away. When he passed by me, I felt my legs go weak. I held out my cell phone and wallet without looking up. That's when something strange happened. When the man got close to him, the simply dressed passenger, he stopped, not for long, maybe 2 seconds, but it was enough for me to notice. "Hurry up," said the other impatiently from the back of the bus. The man shook his head, as if banishing a thought, and continued. "You too," he said dryly. The passenger slowly looked up. His eyes were calm, not defiant, not submissive. Calm in a way that didn't fit the situation. He took out his wallet, which was empty of cards, and handed it over. There was no cell phone. The man picked it up, opened it, and frowned. "Is that all?" "Yes," replied the passenger in a low, firm voice without fear. There was something about that tone that made the man swallow hard. He returned the wallet without realizing it. "Stay there," he moved on. I didn't understand why. Nobody understood. When they finished, they got off the bus. They talked amongst themselves in hushed voices, gesturing towards the road as if they were deciding on their next move. It was was then that the driver spoke, almost whispering, "They're not just going to steal." And we all knew he was right. One of the men went back upstairs. "Change of plans," he said with a crooked smile. "The bus will stay here for a while." His smile was completely devoid of humor. He went down again. Time began to stretch. Minutes that felt like hours. The sun setting, painting everything a dirty orange. The wind rocking the stationary bus like a wounded animal. People began to cry silently. Others prayed. Some cursed God mentally. I looked ahead again. The simply dressed passenger now had his eyes closed. His hands rested on his legs. He didn't murmur. He didn't move. He seemed at peace. I don't know why, but that bothered me more than the weapons. You're not afraid," whispered the woman beside him. He opened his eyes and looked at her. "I'm with you," he replied. She frowned, confused. "What?" He smiled slightly. At that moment I heard shouts from outside, raised voices. One of the men kicked the side of the bus, furious. Something had gone wrong. And, for the first time since it all began, I had a clear feeling that this parade wasn't just for us. It was for them too. And nobody, absolutely nobody inside, knew yet who was sitting between us. The first shot wasn't meant to kill anyone. It was a warning. The dry sound burst through the air and pierced the bus windows like an invisible punch. The girl screamed. Someone in the back began to pray aloud. The driver lowered his head, his hands still on the steering wheel, as if that could protect him. "Everyone sit down," shouted one of the men outside. The bus turned into a box of short breaths. I looked out the window, trying to understand what was happening. Two of the gang members were arguing near the red car. One of them was gesturing nervously, pointing to the bushes around the road. The other was shaking his head, irritated, as if he were being accused of something he didn't understand. This is not how it should be happening. They had stopped buses before, you could tell, but something there was, beyond their control. "That wasn't part of the plan," I heard one of them say, too loudly. The man who had returned to the bus climbed back on, this time without a smile. His face was tense, his jaw clenched. "Driver, turn off the engine." The driver obeyed. The silence that followed was even worse. Without the sound of the engine, you could hear the wind passing through the metal body, a constant hum, almost like a lament. "Listen carefully," said the man, walking down the aisle. "We're going to use the bus. That's all. If everyone cooperates, nobody gets hurt." He stopped in the middle of the aisle, right next to the simply dressed passenger. He stayed there a little longer than necessary. "You," she said, pointing at him. "Look at me." The passenger slowly opened his eyes. The man hesitated again. "What's your problem?" he asked, trying to sound aggressive. "None," he replied. The voice didn't rise. It didn't fall. It was steady. "So why are you so calm?" Some people turned their faces away, afraid that the conversation would make things worse. The passenger took a deep breath before answering. "Because fear won't decide what happens here." The man laughed briefly, without humor. "You're crazy." "Perhaps," he replied, "but you are not." That hit the man in a strange way. I saw it in his eyes, a quick flash of confusion, almost guilt. "That's enough," the other one interrupted from the back. "No talking. Tie up the driver. The climate has changed." Two people started crying for real now, without trying to hide it. An older gentleman began to feel unwell, his hand on his chest. No one dared to get up to help. The simply dressed passenger stood up. "Hey!" shouted one of the men, pointing his gun. "Sit down now." He obeyed, without haste, without defiance, but before sitting down, he placed his hand on the back of the seat belonging to the gentleman who was feeling unwell. "Breathe with me," he said softly. Now, I saw the man's chest rise and fall slowly. The trembling subsided. I can't explain it. I don't know how. I only know that it happened. "What the hell was that?" someone muttered behind me. The men decided to remove the driver from the bus. They forced the door open and pulled him by the arm. The driver stumbled and almost fell. When the door closed again, we were alone and trapped. Time began to distort. There were no more minutes, only waiting. Outside, the argument intensified. One of the cars wouldn't start. The other had stopped suddenly, as if it had died in the middle of the road. "That doesn't make sense," I heard one of them shout. "I filled up." Another one kicked the tire, furious. The simply dressed passenger was now looking out the window. His eyes were attentive but not tense, like someone observing something inevitable. "Do you know them?" I whispered, without knowing why. He turned his face toward me. He looked at me as if he already knew who I was. "I know what brought you here," he replied. "And what was it?" "Pain." I didn't have time to ask anything else. One of the men ran back to the bus, his face pale. "Is there someone in here who messed with us?" he shouted. No one answered. "I know it does," he insisted, pointing pointing the gun at the benches. The simply dressed passenger stood up again. "It's me," he said. The entire bus held its breath. The man stood there, bewildered. "You, what? If something is wrong, it's me," he repeated. The man started laughing nervously. "Who do you think you are?" The passenger took a step forward. "Someone you've already called, even without realizing it. Laughter is dead." The man took a step back. "Don't come near here," he said, his voice faltering. It was at that moment that I realized something terrifying. No weapon was pointed directly at him, not because the men didn't want to, but because for some reason they couldn't. Outside, the sky darkened far too quickly for that time of day. The wind picked up, and the road, which had always been there, began to feel wrong, as if she had been chosen, and not by chance. The gang leader boarded the bus with anger in his eyes. Not the loud, shouting anger of someone who screams. It was worse. It was silent, compressed, as if something was squeezing his chest from the inside. "Everyone sit down. Now." Nobody moved, not out of defiance, out of sheer fear, a fear that had already gone beyond the point of reaction. He pointed the gun at the ceiling and fired. The bang made the whole bus shake. Pieces of insulation fell like dirty dust. I'm not going to repeat myself. Some people screamed, others cowered, but the simply dressed passenger remained standing. The leader realized. "You like to draw attention to yourself, don't you?" He walked until he was less than a meter away from him. The gun was now pointed directly at his chest. "I thought it's over. I thought that's how it ended." "Kneel," the leader ordered. The passenger didn't move. "Kneel," he shouted, his voice now breaking. "You don't want to do that," he replied. The leader's hand trembled, not from ordinary fear. It was as if his body was reacting to something his mind couldn't accept. "I've killed people for less," he whispered. "I know," he said, "and you still hear those voices at night." The leader froze. "Shut up," he growled. "Shut up! They say his name," the passenger continued, glancing at one of the men outside. "They say you should have stopped that day." The man outside turned his face sharply, as if he had been punched in the eye. "How do you know that?" shouted the leader. No one inside the bus was breathing. "Because nothing you did went unnoticed," he replied. "Not even what you try to forget." The leader took a step back, then another. "Boss," one of the men called out nervously. "Let's go. Something's wrong here." "Wrong how?" shouted the leader. "It's just some guy talking nonsense." But the voice didn't convince even himself. The simply dressed passenger looked around the bus, at the mother with the child, at the sick man, at me. "You don't need to be afraid," he said, now in a loud voice. "This doesn't end here." "Shut up," the leader shouted again, pointing his weapon. "Shut up or I swear." He pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The dry click echoed in the silence. The leader looked at the gun. He squeezed it again. Nothing. What the hell? He turned the gun towards the ground and pulled the trigger. Again nothing. "No, no, no, no," he murmured. Another man tried the same thing, the same result. Dead weapons, like useless pieces of iron. The panic has shifted sides. "That's not possible," one of them said in an almost childlike voice. The passenger took a step forward. "You chose to stop this bus," he said, "but you didn't choose who was inside." The leader fell to his knees, literally. The gun slipped from his hand and hit the ground with a hollow sound. "What are you?" she asked, now crying without shame. The passenger knelt in front of him, getting to the same height. "Someone who is still giving you time." The man covered his face with his hands. He was trembling like a lost child. Outside, the others began to flee. One tried to start the car. Another ran down the road and fell onto the asphalt, stumbling as if something had pushed him. But nobody managed to get very far. There was no chasing. There were no screams, just the heavy feeling that no one was in charge anymore. The passenger stood up slowly. "This ends now," he said. The wind suddenly stopped. The sky began to clear, as if nothing had happened. And then I realized something that sent chills down my spine. He hadn't come to save us from them. I had come to confront what they were carrying. And that, it wasn't over yet. After the guns failed, nobody moved. Not the gang members, not us. It was as if the air inside the bus had changed density. Not heavy, different. The fear no longer screamed. He observed. The leader was still kneeling, his face buried in his hands. He wept silently, like someone who had finally reached rock bottom. "Get up," said the simply dressed passenger. It wasn't an order. It was an invitation. The man stood up slowly, as if each muscle was relearning how to function. "I can't," he murmured. "I can't forget." "I know," he replied. "That's why you need to stop running." One of the other men boarded the bus with unsteady steps. His face was dirty, his eyes wide. "Boss, the cars won't start. My cell phone died. Everything died." The leader did not respond. The passenger turned to the man. "You can sit down," he said. "No one will hurt you." The man looked around, confused. confused. Then he sat down on the first available bench, his hands on his head. That's when something unexpected happened. The man who had felt unwell at the beginning got up with difficulty. He walked to the hallway, supporting himself on the benches. His voice trembled. I want to talk. Everyone looked at him. All my life I've been afraid, he continued. Afraid of dying, afraid of losing, afraid of not being enough. And now, he took a deep breath. Now I'm here, on a bus, stopped in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by armed men. And for the first time, I'm not afraid. He looked at the passenger. Who are you? The passenger took a while to respond. Someone who walks with you even when you don't realize it, he said. The girl's mother started crying again, but now it wasn't despair. It was relief, mixed with something deeper. He touched my daughter, she said, gesturing towards the now calm child. When you walked past her, she stopped trembling. The passenger knelt down to be at the girl's level. What's your name? He asked. Emily, she replied softly. You were very brave, Emily. She smiled. I felt a lump in my throat. That's when something shifted inside me. Wait, I said, raising my hand without realizing it. If you can do this, why let things get to this point? He looked at me again, that look that seemed to pierce through layers. Because what was exposed needed to come to light, he replied. For them, for you, for me. I swallowed hard. You've been avoiding this question for years, he said without raising his voice. But today, you've decided to listen. My heart raced. The gang leader slumped down on a bench. He stared at the ground, defeated. I thought God had given up on me, she said, almost inaudibly. The passenger approached him. You gave up on yourself, he replied. I didn't. The man lifted his face, his eyes red. Is there still time? The passenger placed his hand on his shoulder. It always worked. Outside, sirens began to blare in the distance. Someone at some point had managed to call for help, but there was no rush. There was no attempt to escape. When the police arrived, they found an intact bus, people alive, and armed men sitting silently on the ground. Who is responsible? Asked one of the police officers. No one responded immediately. I searched for the passenger with my eyes. The bank was empty. I began to say. He was here. No one knew how to explain it. We only knew one thing. None of us left that bus the same way we came in. And for the first time, I understood that stopping on the road hadn't been a mistake. It had been a meeting. The police did what needed to be done. Questions, notes, handcuffs. Everything as always happens when something goes wrong on the road. But there was a problem. No explanation was sufficient. How many suspects? 4. Weapons? Yes. Were they functional? Before? Yes. And after? Silence. They tested the weapons right there. They all failed, as if they had been empty for years. And the man you mentioned? One of the officers asked, looking at the report. The passenger? Nobody knew. He wasn't on the list. Nobody remembered him arriving. Nobody remembered him leaving. We only remembered him there. We were released hours later. The bus didn't continue its journey. Everyone got a ride, a taxi, a police car. I accepted the offer to be dropped off at a nearby gas station. When I got into the police car, I looked back one last time. The road was normal. Cars were passing by. Clear sky, as if nothing had happened, but I knew I had it. At home that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bus aisle, the moment he stood up, the way he spoke, the silence that followed. I grabbed my cell phone, a borrowed one because mine was never recovered, and tried searching for news. Nothing. A small note about a thwarted robbery attempt. No mention of anything strange. No explanation. I felt robbed, not objects, answers. In the following days, something began to change. The man who had been feeling unwell called me. I don't know how he got my number. I made an appointment, he said, after years of putting it off. An appointment for what? For everything. Doctor, therapist, with my son. We hadn't spoken in 6 years. The girl's mother posted a photo of her daughter sleeping with the caption, "She didn't wake up crying today." The gang leader, I learned later, couldn't withstand the first hearing. He cried. He told everything. He didn't ask for a plea bargain. He didn't ask for a reduced sentence. He only said one sentence. I stopped a bus, and I was stopped by something bigger. And me, I started remembering things I'd spent my whole life avoiding. That old guilt, that wrong decision, that cry for help that I ignored. It was as if the silence of that man on the bus had followed me home with me. A week later, I was back on the road. I don't know why. There was no practical reason. I just needed it. I stopped the car exactly where the bus had been intercepted. There were no marks, no sign of a struggle, no cross, no memorial, just wind. If that was real, I murmured. Why me? The answer did not come in words. It came to mind. Me, years before in a hospital. Me, saying I didn't believe in anything anymore. Me, asking for a sign, any sign, and laughing at myself right after. The signal had come, just not in the format I expected. When I returned to the car, I noticed something on the passenger seat. A wallet. Simple. Expensive. I opened it carefully. There were no documents. There was no money. Just a folded piece of paper. You weren't alone on that road. You never were. My hands started to tremble. I knew in that instant that it wasn't meant to be shown or proven or to go viral. It was meant to be lived, and the story wasn't over yet. After that night, nothing went back to normal. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. It was worse. It was silent. Things kept happening. Work, traffic, bills, unanswered messages, but there was a constant noise underneath it all, like an echo that wouldn't go away. I put the wallet in the drawer. I didn't tell anyone, not even the people who were on the bus with me. There was no need for additional witnesses. I had already done what I needed to do. But the truth is, I started to change without realizing it. I started waking up earlier. I started listening more and talking less. I started noticing people who were previously just part of the scenery. And, most importantly, I started to be confronted. Every time I tried to repeat old habits, running away, postponing, ignoring, something held me back inside, not as guilt, as a memory. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected call. "You were on that bus, right?" a male voice asked. "It was," I replied cautiously. "This is Detective Harris. I need to ask you some questions." Off the record, we met at a roadside cafe, the kind of place where drivers stop for a breather between destinations. "It doesn't add up," he said, stirring his coffee cup. "Nothing you've reported adds up. Sometimes the truth doesn't add up," I replied without thinking. He looked up. "That's exactly what scares me." He told me that one of the gang members had had a breakdown in his cell, not an aggressive one, quite the opposite. "He kept repeating a phrase," said the detective. "He called me by the name only my mother used." I swallowed hard. "And the leader?" I asked. The detective sighed. "He asked to speak with a pastor. Then he asked to speak with the nearest victim. Then he gave up on all of that and asked for silence." Silence? He said that for the first time he could hear. I knew at that moment that this had not been an isolated event. It had been an interruption. Days later, I spoke to someone from my past again, someone I owed an apology to for years. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't easy, but it was real. "What has changed?" the person asked me. I thought about the bus, about the road, about the man no one recognized. "I stopped pretending I didn't hear," I replied. "That same week, something curious happened. I started noticing people like him. They are not physically identical, but they are the same in their way of being. A man helping a stranger without expecting thanks. A woman listening to someone everyone else ignored. A silence that brought more peace than 1,000 words. It was no coincidence. It was continuity. One night, I sat alone in the room, with my wallet in my hand again. "What do you want from me?" I asked aloud. The answer came, just like that first time. Not in voice, in direction. I understood that the road hadn't been chosen just to confront a gang. It had been chosen to awaken passengers, and I was one of them. Months have passed. The road became a road again. The bus became a statistic. The gang became a legal case. But inside me, that seat remained occupied. I sometimes dreamed of the bus aisle. Not of weapons, not of screams. I dreamed of silence, of the exact moment when everything stopped making sense, and paradoxically began to make more sense than ever. One day, I received a letter. There was no sender. Just my name, handwritten. Inside, a clipping from a local newspaper. "Conviction ends case of kidnapping on interstate highway." Nothing more than that. But on the back of the paper, someone had written a short, almost erased sentence. "Some encounters don't need explaining. They just need to continue." I understood. That week, I accepted something I had been avoiding for years. I sat on a simple bench at the back of a nearly empty church. I didn't go out of faith. I went out of honesty. For the first time, I asked for nothing. I questioned nothing. I just stayed. The silence was the same as on the bus. And like on that road, I didn't feel judgment. I felt presence. I left there a changed person, not converted to a label, but responsible for what I now knew, because that's the real weight of that day. When you recognize who was on the bus, you can no longer live as if he never crossed your path. Sometime later, I ran into the girl's mother by chance. Emily was older, more confident. "She talks about that day sometimes," said her mother, "not as a trauma, as a good story." I smiled. "Some stories save more than one life," I replied. Today, whenever I get on a bus, I choose a different seat, never the same one. But I always leave an empty seat next to me, not out of superstition, out of remembrance, because I learned something on that forgotten road in the United States. bus. Sometimes the danger isn't the gang, it isn't the gun, it isn't the road. It's like going through life without noticing who sat next to you. And I know now, with the calmest certainty I've ever had, that day a gang stopped a bus thinking they were in control. They didn't know Jesus was inside, but we needed to know. Nobody talked about it the next day. Not in the newspapers, not on social media, not in casual work conversations. The world continued as it always does, too fast to wait for something invisible to be explained. But for those who were on that bus, time never returned to its normal rhythm. The road was cleared. The case was closed. People went home, but no one came back the same. For weeks, I tried to convince myself that everything could be explained. Collective stress, coincidence, adrenaline, the human brain filling in the gaps when fear goes too far. I read articles, searched for rational answers, forced explanations. None of them could survive the memory of those eyes. It wasn't what he did, it was how he was. Too calm for chaos, too present for danger, too human to be ignored. The gang leader was sentenced to a long prison term. He refused plea deals, he refused interviews, he even refused visits for a while. When he finally spoke, he said only one thing to the prison chaplain: "I had never seen myself the way I did that day." One of the other men abandoned crime. He moved to another state. Today he works as a mechanic. He doesn't talk about the past, but those who know him say he stops everything when someone needs help, as if he were paying a debt that only he understands. The girl's mother began attending a shelter for traumatized children. Not out of religion, but out of gratitude. She said that if her daughter had been spared fear, it was only right to try to spare others. The man who nearly died on that bus seat lived longer than the doctors expected. He reconciled with his son. He started smiling again. He said in a short phone call months later, "I'm no longer in a hurry to die. There's still work to be done." And me? I started listening to the silence more. I learned that there are questions that don't require immediate answers, but rather a stance. That some experiences don't ask for proof, they ask for consequences. That it's pointless to discuss whether something was real or not when the impact continues to happen every day. Because if it wasn't real, why has so much changed? Sometimes I think about that empty bench by the hallway. The space that remained after he disappeared. An ordinary space, just like any other, but one that never truly seemed empty again. Today, when I get on buses, subways, or stand in long lines, I observe people more carefully, not looking for someone like him. That would be too easy. I look for what he left behind. I look for gestures. I look for pauses. I look for silent courage, because I learned something that nobody teaches. Jesus doesn't enter places to be recognized. He enters to be needed. And perhaps the gang's biggest mistake that day wasn't stopping the bus. It was thinking that control came from weapons, that power came from fear, that the road was theirs. It wasn't. It never was. That bus was full of ordinary people carrying invisible pains. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was exactly the kind of place where he had always been. Not on stage, not in a packed temple, but in the midst of it all. In the midst of fear, in the midst of confusion, in the midst of people too broken to pretend that everything is all right. And if there's one thing that road taught me, it's this: you don't need to acknowledge Jesus to be reached by him. You don't need to call him by name. Sometimes all it takes is being in a place where no one else wants to be. The gang thought they had stopped a bus, but on that day, what truly stopped was the course of several lifetimes. And perhaps, now that you've heard this story, something has also stirred within you. If that's the case, don't ignore it, because some stories don't end when the video finishes. They begin when you get up from your seat.